Our presenters today are Matt Brunkwell, Sales Director for eDOCS in North America, Joshua Wertheim, President of Wertheim Global Solutions, and Brent Reed, Manager of Development and Support of Wertheim Global Solutions. The webinar will last approximately 1 hour. It will be recorded and made available on our website shortly afterwards. We welcome your questions. If you have any, please enter them into the appropriate location on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will answer all of them at the end. Josh, you may begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Josh Wertheim, and I want to start by saying that unfortunately Matt is at the airport and hopefully will be joining us shortly. But I guess I'm going to be the one handling the introduction. And I want to start by thanking you all for attending this webinar that OpenText asked us to conduct. And I'll be going through a PowerPoint presentation followed by a demonstration conducted by Brent Reed to show you the Guardian for eDOCS, or as it's known within the OpenText price list as Guardian for eDOCS by Wertheim. We are the company that developed the product, the security product you're about to see and hear about. And with that, let me go ahead and begin. As Melissa mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be sure to answer them as we can. So basically, let me start by explaining why we first developed Guardian a couple of years ago. There are plenty of products out there on the market that help you deal with people coming in from the outside to try to get your information. Folks that try to hack into your systems and steal your stuff, publish it in the WikiLeaks and all sorts of different places, or use it for their own nefarious purposes like stealing credit card information. But what we found a couple of years ago is there is not much out there that deals with information that is taken by people within your organization, whether it's employees or contractors or somebody who is an attorney in a law firm that decides they want to take their documents with them when they leave the firm, even though they aren't their documents, they're your documents. We came up with the idea for a product that would help address internal abuse as opposed to external abuse. So the best time to address one of these situations is before it happens. There are a number of studies out there, some that determine the average cost of a breach from somebody on the outside, and some that deal with the cost of a breach from the inside. And the price tag is quite hefty. And what a lot of experts have determined is that the biggest threat doesn't come from the outside. It actually comes from people within the inside who are either intentionally trying to hurt your organization or by giving away information, like through a phishing attempt. It's interesting, I wish I had saved it, but just yesterday, I got a very valid looking email from what looked like Microsoft that said that my password was about to expire and that I had to click on the link that was in the email to reset my password. Well, I don't know how many times people get these and ignore them, but sometimes people don't ignore them. And I actually looked at the content of that email. And if you look at the top where the address was from whom it came, instead of being Microsoft.com, it came from Micorsoft.com, Micorsoft.com. Now, if that happened in your organization and you have hundreds or dozens or thousands of folks that get an email like that, what is the likelihood that at least one of those people is going to click on the link thinking that it's a valid email that's telling them to reset their Microsoft password? This is the kind of situation that we try to help mitigate or avoid entirely. So how does Guardian work and what does it do? It adds a layer of security on top of the existing security. We don't change anything within the existing security framework of eDOCS. What we do is we add an additional layer on top of that security that monitors what people are doing, and based upon settings within the Guardian system that you maintain and install or set up, it acts upon those activities in real time, not tomorrow when the person is out of the country, but in real time. And why do you need that? It's because current systems protect documents that shouldn't have access to those documents. What we're trying to do is help you protect yourself from users who have access to documents. Perhaps it's again, I'll use a lawyer as an example. It's an attorney in a law firm who has rights to the documents, but is going to do something that he shouldn't or she shouldn't be doing with those documents. So who needs it? Well, I mentioned law firms. If not just if the lawyer is going to leave the firm and you need to know about it while they're trying to take their documents, but also if it's a litigation matter or something that's highly sensitive and you don't want that information taken out of the organization. If it's a public sector or a government agency, that you need to protect those documents from unauthorized disclosure, stealing financial information for someone's own profit, or, and I find this particularly important, HR. With all the rules and regulations, not just in the United States, but around the world, you need to make sure that somebody isn't bypassing those rules and causing you all sorts of undue problems if they take information within an HR department and either make it public or use it for their own nefarious purposes. Who holds the risk if this information is breached? Well, we see a bunch of different levels, but obviously the business stakeholders have a potential loss of revenue, not to mention reputation. And if you remember the very first slide, I had a whole bunch of situations where companies were hacked, either from the inside, like Edward Snowden or LuxLeaks in Europe, or the Panama Papers, but also external people who have gotten information by phishing, such as the Democratic National Convention, or committee, I should say, which had a lot of emails taken because of a phishing attempt that was successful. So you got the business stakeholders that have their exposure. You also have the folks in the IT department, and it's potentially a you bet your job if you knew that you could have prevented a leak and didn't do something to stop it. So there's all sorts of different, I'm not going to read this, obviously, it's a long slide, but there are a lot of different qualifiers to help you determine whether you need Guardian. And in my professional opinion, having worked with law firms and other businesses for in excess of 30 years, pretty much everybody needs this at some level to be able to protect yourself from somebody taking your information. And whether it's a law firm or it's a government agency or it's just a firm with an HR department or a financial services firm, or you have really sensitive stuff and you're concerned that maybe somebody's going to leak that stuff to the outside world, and what would the damage be done if that happened, you need Guardian. So what does Guardian do for you? It monitors the activity in eDOCS. We also have a version for Content Server, but obviously the purpose of this webinar is to just discuss the eDOCS version. And based upon the rules that you set, which are what we call thresholds, it acts upon the person who is doing what potentially is damaging. And there are a couple of different things that it can do. It can either notify an administrator or an administration group, and you determine who that notification goes to. And it can, at a different level of a threshold being met, disable the user's account in real time. So a person who may have a threshold, and I'll use an example where perhaps a person has the rights to export 20 documents in a day because that's what their normal activity is. When they hit that 30th, perhaps, all of a sudden they get a logout screen. They're offline, and if they try to re-log in, they can't. And what then happens is the administrator then goes in and using a couple of different alternatives based upon whether you're using the current version or the upcoming version, which Brent will show you. You would review the person's activity, make sure what they're doing is correct, and re-enable them, which happens immediately. Or if you're concerned about what this person is doing, you call the person on the phone or send an email or barge into their office to find out what the heck they're doing. And if they're not doing the right thing, you stop them in their tracks. Users, by the way, don't know that Guardian is there. So somebody who thinks that they're getting away with something at 2 o'clock in the morning by downloading something from home will get the same offline notification screen, be logged out, and they're going to say to themselves, what the heck is going on? And then the administrator would get the notification at 2 o'clock in the morning, and if that person's awake, could call the user. I'll use Edward Snowden as the example and say, Edward, what are you doing? Why are you downloading 10,000 documents in the last 20 minutes? And Edward would be caught red-handed. So we have multiple levels of rules. The three that are in the current version are what we call global library rules, group rules, and user rules. So a library rule would be a rule that you establish for every user in the organization in that library. So you could have a rule that says no user should ever be downloading more than 100 documents in a day. You can then set a group rule that says, well, the new hire group, we want to limit what they can download to 20 documents in a day. And then if you have a specific user that you want to monitor even more granularly, you could set a user rule that says, let this person only download 5 documents in a day, otherwise notify me as the administrator so I can see what it is they're downloading. With the next version, we have completely expanded upon these levels and are also introducing metadata rules. So you can set a rule that says, I have a very sensitive matter, for instance, and I want to make sure that nobody ever downloads more than 20 documents in a day for that matter. Or I have a sensitive client, so no documents for the matters for that client can be downloaded. Or perhaps you can have a document type rule. So if you have, say, an HR document type, you could say HR document types should be really micromanaged a lot more than other document types in the organization. Brent will actually show you this in operation, but I just want to give you a couple of screenshots to show you now. So this is the rule setup screen. This one would be for a checkout per day rule that says for any checkout for any user in the library that happens in any rolling 24-hour period. It's not midnight to midnight, it's rolling 24-hour periods. After 3 checkouts, notify wgguard@gmail.com, and if the user hits 4, disable the user's account. This is a low level because this is how we demo it. So we can actually show you it in operation. If we had 30 and 40, it would take forever to go through a demo. But this is an example of what we'll be demonstrating in just a second. And it says, these are the actions to take if these thresholds are reached. The sales department is a global rule that says perhaps we want to have a different level of rules with different thresholds, and we can go more granular than that. We can go further than that if we want by setting custom time periods. We're not limited to just days. So we can say if in 5 minutes a user deletes more than 2 documents, notify me. This is an example of another group rule. So users are disabled. You go to the management console for Guardian with the current version, and you can see who is disabled. From here, you can really check on what it is that person's doing. You get all the information right out of the activity log, and it's super fast to see what they've done. And you can not just look at what caused them to be disabled, but also activity that's more verbose. So in this case, I want to look at these particular activities over the last 30 days. And that pretty little pie chart on the right basically breaks down all the different activities that this user has been doing in that 30-day period. And if you are satisfied that this user should be re-enabled. If you notice that in the bottom right of this form, you have the enable button. And obviously this management console is not available to everybody. There is a list of people who are authorized to run this. And there is an audit trail of when users are not only disabled, but enabled, so that you can see who enabled the user and when and why. You get a lot of disabled user information. You can also look at any user from this screen. You're not just limited to disabled users. So if I want to see a specific user, I can also get some activity information about any user, not just the disabled ones. And you can also run the report based upon just one specific activity as opposed to every activity historical from the beginning of time if you want. Now, as I mentioned before, notification goes out. It doesn't just go out necessarily to people via email. We also send out notifications to management's or administrators' smartphones. It depends on how you set up the notification list. So if you have the phone number at the carrier, we'll actually send the notification to a user's, the administrator's smartphone. Basically the same kind of information you'll see in an email, but succinct, telling you what rule has been exceeded, who the user is, when it happened, or what type of rule it was, and then a list of what documents or items caused the trigger to fire off to indicate that this user has exceeded the threshold. So this is an example. The last one actually was the email. I apologize. This is the smartphone version that shows the same information but sent to a smartphone as a text message. I want to just spend a couple of seconds talking about the architecture. We basically have everything on the server side, nothing on the desktop. So it doesn't matter what type of desktop a user has, whether they're running this using a phone, running eDOCS to a phone, or DM extensions, Outlook extensions, the web, doesn't matter. We monitor and maintain what people are doing that are accessing your eDOCS repository by putting everything on the SQL server. So the tables are there. We have a couple of triggers, a couple of stored procedures, the mail client, and a service called Guardian Watcher. And then we have the rule minder, which is the admin console, which basically allows you to, as you saw previously, monitor what people are doing, set up your rules, and re-enable users when the time comes if it's appropriate. What we hear from our customers who use the Guardian is they know they can't live without it. That's basically a nutshell of what folks tell us. They love the proactive approach. Reports are wonderful, but using the Edward Snowden example once again, Edward Snowden was in Hong Kong with how many hundreds of thousands of documents before the department he worked at the US government even knew that he had taken anything. That's a little late. With Guardian, you actually know about it in real time. And using my 2 o'clock in the morning example from before, if at 2 o'clock in the morning, a person is downloading stuff or accessing things they shouldn't be in a way they shouldn't be accessing them, and the notification goes out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they continue to do what they're not supposed to be doing, instead of just the notification doesn't even get read until 8 o'clock in the morning when the administrator wakes up. The user is disabled and can't do anything until the administrator does wake up and says, wait a second, what was this guy doing? Thank God it stopped him or her in their tracks and didn't cause any more damage, and now I can act upon it when I wake up. Going to go through a couple of, I have a lot of use cases. I'm not going to go through every single one. I'm just going to highlight a couple. I think I pretty much covered the Snowden example, and of course then there's Bradley Manning as well, another person on the inside who took documents out of the US military system. Law firms, I mentioned a couple of these already, the highly confidential matters, and also the other use case would be to make sure that a lawyer who's about to leave the firm doesn't try to take their documents in with them over the weekend, then walk in at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday and say, I quit, walks out the door, And then you run the reports that show that this person took all those documents. So this can help you be aware that this person is taking documents, and as a result, you might come to the conclusion maybe they're taking the documents because they're about to leave. So you know ahead of time what this person is doing, and could perhaps come up with how to deal with it while it's happening instead of after the fact. Monitoring new employees. We have a government agency that they want to make sure that people aren't doing things when they're new hires that they shouldn't be doing. I know an example of somebody at an insurance company who was hired. This is a few years ago, but she was hired, and while she was a new hire, she got into the system and started doing research on the pharmacies that they did business with, because her father owned a chain of pharmacies, and she was trying to get her father some competitive advantage information from the insurance company. So you want to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen by watching what your new employees do, not necessarily totally micromanaging what they're doing, but at least be aware that they may be doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. Mentioned the Panama Papers. I think most of us, if not all of us, already have heard of it. The same example would be the Lux leaks in the UK. I'm sorry, in Luxembourg. It was a banking issue with many documents. It's as famous in Europe as the Panama Papers are here. Protecting financial data, if you have that stuff in your eDOCS environment. Mention government agencies. Once again, I will just, there's a lot of reasons why you want to make sure that if you're a government agency, that people aren't doing things they shouldn't be doing, especially if you're in a highly sensitive department. HR, I mentioned that before as well. You want to make sure that folks aren't circumventing the system by emailing resumes. That's another example of how to use it in HR. You want to make sure that if you have a workflow set up for human resources, that it's being followed. So you can actually use it not just to see if somebody's doing something they shouldn't be doing as far as stealing stuff, but also that they're doing the job the way they're supposed to be doing it. Manufacturing, in the defense industry, we actually have a client in manufacturing that they want to make sure that not more than a certain number of types of documents are being added into the system. They want to lock down what's being added. So they set up a rule or multiple rules that say if anybody exceeds that limit to the number of drawings, for instance, we want to know about it, because obviously we want to keep that very tightly controlled. So Brent's going to show you most, if not all of this, but we get asked a lot what's coming, and we're very excited about what's coming. A new version coming by the end of the year. It's already been delayed. I will be perfectly honest. It was supposed to be out by Enterprise World this summer. We decided to hold back because we want to make sure it's 100% bulletproof, and we had a few additional features we wanted to add to it. But one of the biggest changes is instead of having to enter thresholds based upon raw numbers, so a threshold that says if a person exceeds 10 downloads in a day, notify me. Our predictive thresholds will say, let's examine what this person does or this group of people does or do over time. And then let's set it so that if a person exceeds their average workload on a certain activity by a certain percentage, then notify the administrator. So for instance, if a person averages 20 downloads a week, and all of a sudden they hit 50, you want to know about that. You set up a rule that says if they exceed their normal activity by 250%, I think that's the number, notify me. So you can set predictive thresholds, and you get multiple predictive thresholds based upon multiple activities at once. That's another big change. In the current version, you can say, I want to set up a rule around downloads. I want to set another rule around exports. With the new version, you can say, I want to set 250% as exports, emails, and downloads. We have additional options for thresholds and notification settings. We have exclusions. So in a law firm, if somebody is doing some litigation, and needs to all of a sudden, access multiple documents outside of their normal realm of activity, you can set an exclusion saying this user is going to be doing e-discovery for the following week. So don't bother monitoring them. I know they're going to be exceeding the threshold. And then expire that exclusion next Monday. So just give them a week. And of course, if you need to extend it at that point, you can go in and say extend it for another week. We get the custom thresholds by metadata, customized notification text. The current version hard codes within basically most of, if not all of, what the notification text has. Now we have variables you can insert in. We have additional options for emailing. And what I insisted on was that you can set a rule that says, I want to monitor every document for exports, or I don't care about unsecured items. So only do a monitoring on the documents that are secured. So if somebody was to email 10,000 unsecured items, I don't care. I mean, that's a choice you make. But if they email 100 secured emails, I need to know about it. So you get to set the rules on either or both of those options. This is what the predictive threshold screen looks like. It's much prettier. Down at the bottom, you'll actually see a graphic that kind of shows you activity over time. So red is the high level this person has performed this activity. The yellow is the average, and the white, I think that's white, or maybe it's a dark gray or light gray, is the number of the average activity for the low end of what they've done in that period. It's really, really nice. And at this point, I'm going to flip this over to Brent. I hope you're ready for me, Brent.
Yes, I am.
And I'm going to make Brent the presenter, so please just hang on one sec.
All right, can you see my screen okay?
I can.
All right. Okay, this is the screen that you saw in the PowerPoint, and this one's a live screen. And what I do is I use this one for a demo because I have very low threshold set. So we have a rule name on this one is look rule. And what this does is it monitors for anyone who is taking a view of a document. They don't have to necessarily open it. They can just be using the preview tab, because they can use that to take screenshots or any number of ways to get the data out of the system without it being noticed. And what we do is on this, we chose the activity. We chose it on look. We chose a start date, so you can have a launch. So you can set these rules up ahead of time and then have a launch date. We choose the period of time that you're going to be monitoring, whether it's an hour, minute, day, week, month, so on. The hour and the day are the most common monitoring. And then we choose a first action to take and the threshold that we're going to monitor in order to take that action. And then we set the second action, what we're going to do when the second threshold is hit, and then who we're going to notify. So this rule is all set up, and you can see it's pretty simple and straightforward. If somebody looks at more than 2 documents within an hour, we're going to send an email to this address. And if they look at more than 4 documents within an hour, we're going to disable their account and then also email this address and say, hey, this person has been disabled. Well, let's see how that works. I'll flip over here, and this is a screen I'm sure that you're all familiar with, this typical eDOCS screen, and I was logged in here earlier, so I'm going to click on a document and get a look, and then I'm going to click on another document and get a look. And then next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and check our email. And let's see what happens here. Inbox. Let's refresh. It's 13:30, 1:30. Yep, same time. We just got a Guardian notification that a rule has been exceeded. So we open up that email, and we can see that the Guardian rule has exceeded an established threshold. It identifies which library the user was in, which rule they broke, who the user was that broke the rule, and what time they did it, and so on. So you can see the document count, and also it shows which documents were looked at. So we know what documents they're viewing. You get a lot of information. You can decide right now, oh, this isn't a problem. this person should have access to those documents. It's not a problem that they're looking at. Or you could say, wow, why are they looking at those documents? Maybe you ought to look into this. Well, the user in the meantime has no idea that anything's going on. He doesn't know a notification's been sent out. So he keeps going on looking down through, oh, the panel papers, do not copy. That might be important. Maybe I better look at that. And then they look at another, oh, a password list. Maybe that's something I need. And so they check that document and take a look at it. And there they are. Wow, look at the password list. And then they go and look at a third one. And by now, and every demo has its issues. The user should have been locked out by this point because we've looked at 4 documents, and for whatever reason, it didn't. So the glitch number 1 for our demo, and hopefully that'll be the only one. So we'll go back to our inbox, and we can see that the second notification has gone out. Again, it identifies all the information about the user and the library. Again, shows the documents that have been viewed. And normally, this user would have been locked out. So I'll troubleshoot later to find out why it's not locking the user out. But normally, the administrator would go back. They would go in. They would have gotten that notification. They'd go into disabled users, refresh their list, and there he is. So I highlight the user, and then you can look at and see what have they been up to. Here are the documents they've been looking at and accessing for the last 30 days. Let's go look at a little bit longer. Let's go back through and see what they've been doing. You can see we use the same documents over and over for our demos. So you can see that I've been looking at these same documents over and over, but it gives you an idea of what that user has been up to. And then you can also go in and do, as Josh had mentioned, other user research on that person. So you can go up and look at them and say, hey, let's just look at one particular activity type. Have they been downloading anything? Let's see, have they been, what's our download? Checkout. So you can see, well, it hasn't checked out any documents. Let's see what happens for all time. Oh, yeah, they do check out. So again, you can look down through and see what kind of activities this user is involved in on a day-to-day basis, and use that to help make your decision over here. Should I go ahead and re-enable this user, or should I call them into the office and talk to them and find out what they've been up to? Well, in this case, since it's a demo, we're going to go ahead and unlock the user. And as Josh was mentioning earlier, we keep track of all this. You don't want somebody collaborating and unlocking a user when they're downloading a bunch of documents. So in order to unlock a user, you have to give a reason. And you can see the other information is not editable. So it's locked in there. You have to give the information, so you can't pretend somebody else did it. So you have a log, you have a route that you can go back and find out, hey, who's been unlocking users, who, when they get unlocked, or when they get logged out, and so on. Go back to our configured rules. Each of these rules needs to be created independently. So for each activity, changing security, checking out a copy, copying, deleting a version, all these things need to have their own rules. And the reason that becomes important is I'll show you that when we show you the demo of the new version that's in progress. Because we found out when we worked with one of our clients to create enough rules to cover the different groups, that creating rules individually took quite a bit of time, and it created a lot of overhead for maintenance as well. In here, we can show you the email management, where you can show that use a SQL mail profile for sending the emails. And then you can add different email addresses, so that if you have different departments, you can add different email addresses to get those notifications. So the people in the sales department, they don't want to get notifications about people in HR and so on and so forth. So you can choose different email addresses for different rules that you're creating. All right. And then you can also manage different databases. So if you have numerous databases, you can look here. We have a DB Legal that is an eDOCS 5 version, version 10 of eDOCS, and then a government, So you have different databases. So if you have different databases, different eDOCS libraries in your enterprise, you can add Guardian to all those libraries and protect them all. Okay, I just want to make sure I've covered everything. We've covered the user research, the disabled users, and the rules. And now I'm going to take a minute and switch over and show you the newer version. And you can see it looks quite a bit different on the upfront. There are some similarities. The biggest one, though, is what we can do is when we're creating a rule, you create rule number 1, and we list the recommended activities, the ones that we feel compromise your documents: print, delete a version, checkout, send, access denied. Someone's trying to get to documents to which they don't have permission, copies, looks, moving documents, faxing them, changing the security, anything that can compromise your documents. That's where we look at the recommended actions. Now you can do a select all and select every activity, but most times you don't really have a concern with someone creating a document. So we selected the most volatile activities, is how we refer to them, the ones that can compromise your documents, and those are the recommended activities. Now here, in this version, we could still use a counter analysis, which is the thresholds that we set before. However, we're primarily using the predictive analysis, where we analyze the user's behavior and compare it to their average behavior. So when instead of coming up with an arbitrary threshold that your users need to exceed, we come up with one that actually looks at the data, looks at the person's usage, and decides, is this out of the ordinary for this user? Which we feel is a lot more accurate, because we all know we have power users that might look at 100 documents a day. And then we have your low-end users that might look at 2 documents a day. So how do you apply one threshold to both types of users? Well, this solves that issue. We also added, as you see over here, we have 3 actions instead of just 2. So what we do is on the first action, we choose a notify. So on the predictive threshold, we're allowing that user to have 36% more activity than their norm. And what that'll do is notify the administrator. The second action could also be a notify, and in this case, it's 33% above the first threshold. And then the third, we could have it notify, or we could decide on the third, we're going to go ahead and disable. And as I mentioned, this is in development, so there are a few glitches, and you will see a few things that don't work, so please don't peek behind the curtain. So in this case, the third action is going to be a disable, and it's going to occur at 38%, or in this case, let's round it off. I like rounding numbers, 40% more than this threshold. And that's illustrated in this chart below. Here's the predictive analysis. Their actual numbers are the first line. Here's your first threshold. Here's your second threshold. And then there's your disabled threshold, the third. So it gives you more flexibility, and so you don't even have to just turn them off once they hit that second threshold. And you could, if you wanted to, you could come in, and if they hit that first threshold, it just disables the account. If you have particularly sensitive data, you might want to disable them right off the bat and just say, hey, we're done, shut them down until we can figure out what he's been up to. And it all depends on the type of document. You might want to have the notification in as the first and then disable on the second, but it gives you the options. Now, what's also nice is on the notification list, you can choose a different notification email or email list for each threshold. So it might be on the first threshold, you might notify the manager of the department. The second threshold might go to somebody above them, maybe a director. The third threshold might take it right to the security department and say, hey, boom, IT security, and that's who's notified. So you have the option to choose a different notification address for each level of notification. And then the other one that Josh mentioned earlier were the rule exclusions. So with this, you can choose a rule that's been established, and then you can choose either the user or the group and exclude that user or that group from that rule. And you also choose the time that it's going to be in effect. So you set an expiration date so that you know they're going to be doing discovery for the next month, but after that, the rules should still apply. So the exclusions can save you a lot of headaches. So if somebody's doing discovery, your administrators don't have to sit there and constantly re-enable their account over and over again. And we also have some disabled user analytics, just like you saw before, but they're going to be a little more extensive, because what's going to show here is what you saw in the previous version, what activities they've been performing, which documents they've been looking at. What's going to be down here in the second screen is going to show what rules are about to be broken. So perhaps maybe they've been viewing a lot of documents, printing a lot of documents, and they happen to hit a threshold on checkouts. Well, you can come in here and see, wow, okay, they hit the threshold for checkouts, but they're like 10 documents away from hitting the print rule or the rule for the copy. So we're going to have, it gives you more information. The most important part here is giving the administrator as much information as they can before they have to confront the user. Here's what they've been doing. They broke one rule. They're about to break 3 more. We better do something. Or, okay, they broke one rule, but everything else looks normal. Let's go talk to them and see what's up. The main thing is giving you information you need to make decisions. And that's what this is doing. And it'll put them in nice, pretty charts like you see here and so on. The library analytics, we've gone a little bit further with. This gives you the opportunity to go in and not only look at what disabled users have been doing, but you can do some in-depth analysis on what any user is doing, or all users. So you can go in and look at daily activities and see, copy tos, downloads, edits. Again, these volatile activities that we've identified, how many users are doing these. And then we have some slider controls. You can choose the date range that you're looking at. And of course, the data is dynamic. And then you can scroll back and go to history. And again, you get dynamic data. So you can do some analysis that can help you understand how your users are working as well. And then you can do it by document type, see what type of documents people are downloading, creating. Again, change the period of time we're looking at, and so on and so forth. So these analytics can come in handy in a lot more ways than just security. It helps you understand your user behavior as well. All right, and I want to make sure I'm covering all my points. I think I've gotten most everything in here. We've shown you how to create the rules. Okay, the other one I wanted to make sure that talked about on the configured rules is when we create a rule. It's taking a moment to display everything. You don't have to create each rule individually. And that's one of the big time savers, is that once you determine what parameters you're going to put on that rule, you can choose to create the rules all at one time. You go in and set the parameters and then hit create, and it can create a rule for every activity all at once. And again, this is still, I wouldn't even say quite beta, it's more alpha. So we're having some issues. There we go. That's what I need to do. Okay, so you can select all. So we've selected all these volatile activities, export, make versions, writable, remove read-only, queue for deletion, things that can affect your documents. And then when we create the rule, we're creating with one button click these, I think there's probably about 18 or 19 different rules that get created with one button click. And these are library rules, so it would apply to the whole library. It's the same thing. When you go into a group, you can say, hey, recommended activities, let's set the thresholds, and then make the rule. And it makes the rule creation a lot more streamlined and a lot more efficient. And that's about it on what we wanted to demo. We're really excited about this new version. Oh, there is one area, the email customization. I thought there was one more thing that I hadn't shown. This is what Josh talked about before, where the emails going out, since we give the option of sending them to many more people, you can choose what the message is going to be. So you have the body here, we set this stuff because this is the library name, the rule name, and so on and so forth, but you can determine what you want to have in here. You can tell the security person who's about to receive, or who's going to receive this email, hey, this threshold has been exceeded. Please perform steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that they know if they're on the help desk and they get this message, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. So you have this area, and you have a second area down below where you can add messages in, and you can decide what you want to have in there. And then again, we have some information that we have hard coded. The threshold for action, blah blah, has been exceeded by the violation count number, and this is the first, second, or third notification, and then it lets you know as the user's been disabled. And then down below, it'll show the documents they've been accessing. So we feel like that gives you a lot more flexibility and a lot more instruction, because in large organizations especially, it helps that person receiving the email to know what to do when they get that notification. Let me just make sure that there's nothing else. Well, a couple other things. You can change the server you're going to. You can edit the activity list that you're monitoring. This is the database management that we looked at before, where you can work on multiple databases. And then over here, you can choose which server you're working on, and then also which database you're working on. So if you have multiples, you can just switch easily. Once you're logged into the rule miner, you just switch back and forth. So at this time, unless, Josh, you can think of anything that I've forgotten to demo for everybody, I think next is we turn it over to questions to see if anybody has any questions or comments about the product.
The first question is from Nuno Sequeira. Hi guys, you mentioned that the eDOCS account will be disabled, but if I try to email the files before I get disabled, the files will be sent. Can I prevent it based on type of document, matter, or category?
I can field that one for you. Yes, sure. In the new version, you will be able to do it by the document type or matter or client. And the product goes through, and when it hits the threshold, the notification goes out at the point of the threshold. So if you have currently, this is talking current version, if you have a threshold for a notification sent at 10, if they are emailing out 12 documents, the notification will go out at 10. And if they have the disable set at 20, they will be disabled as soon as the 20 is hit. The 21st will not be sent out. So the threshold, you have to allow your people to be able to do their job. So if you have thresholds that shut you down, if they select 40 documents and your threshold is 20, it will send out the first 10, or excuse me, first 20. So you have to understand that the people have to be able to do their jobs. Guardian is meant to mitigate your risk. If you lock things down too tightly, nobody could ever open a document or view it or print it. So we have to have a little bit of balance in there. So you always have a little bit of exposure. The Guardian makes sure that only 10 or 12 documents get out instead of 2 million, as in the Panama Papers. Does that answer their question for you?
Okay, the next question is from Dawn Turner. It looks like she has a couple questions. Do you have to add this app's tables into your DM database? How does the interface between this app and your DM app happen? And does it work with DM16?
Okay, I'll take those two. DM16, yes. And as far as, run down through the question for me again, if you would, please. I know there were 3 parts. I want to make sure I cover all 3.
Sure. Do you have to add this app's tables into your DM database? And how does the interface between this app and your DM app happen?
Okay. Yes. When we set up Guardian on a library, it creates about 13 tables in your DM database. And that's what it uses to track the activities. And we write a lot of the activities to our own tables so we're not constantly hitting the activity table and slowing your system down. So yes, it does add tables to your existing eDOCS library database. And then as far as the interface, it's all happening on the back end through the database. So there's nothing that needs to be installed on a client. And then that way, if somebody's using the web to access, they are monitored just the same as someone who's using the eDOCS interface. And there's really no hooks into the admin part of eDOCS or the client part of eDOCS. We simply install a number of tables and triggers into the database, and then everything is run on the database server, and all the notifications are generated from the database server. And the only time that eDOCS is accessed is when we need to do a disable, and we make sure that we set the disabled accounts or the disable markings in the database, and then we send a refresh to all the DM servers so that their account is immediately locked out instead of having to wait for a database refresh. And please let me know if that answered your question or if you need some more details.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. What you're looking at here, why I want this, is on the left side, you see all the tables that start with the WG underscore. Those are the Guardian tables. And the information that they're not owned, these tables are not owned from a technical standpoint by eDOCS ADM. They're in the same database, but they're owned by the database owner. So, but they are in the same database. The other thing I want to mention is, we get this question a lot, is what if I have multiple libraries and I want to make sure that all my libraries have the same rules? Do I have to set them up in each library? And the answer would be no, not necessarily. We have a product called WinkSync, which will replicate the rules and all the other configuration information of Guardian from one database or one library to another. So you only would have to enter it into one library, and then you could use WinkSync to automatically replicate that information out to the others.
Okay, Dawn says, thank you, this answers her questions. Christy Chilcotti, her question is, how about rules on custom metadata tables?
That is a good question. We initially were going to ignore the custom and only do it on the standard metadata fields. However, after many heated discussions, we decided that it's important to be able to offer it on the custom fields as well. While that may not make it into the very first part of this new release, that is definitely planned. We're still working on that part of it, and it will be in the next version release. So yes, we realize that when you make custom metadata, it's important to be it's important to be able to apply Guardian rules to those custom metadata fields as well. So if we don't get it into this next release, it will be in the release very after that.
Brent, can I, just as a question for you, to make sure we're clear, it will be any table that is a validation table that's linked to the profile?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's what we're looking at. And that's been one of the challenges, and that's why I don't want to promise it in this version, because it's pretty basic to go down and show for client and matter and all the standard fields. However, when you look at custom fields, there's a lot more behind the scenes that has to take place in order to be able to set those thresholds. So I just don't want to overpromise on this next release.
Okay, the next question is from Frank Mari. Is Guardian dependent on any of your companion products, such as Wink tools?
The answer is no. It's a standalone product. The only thing, as I mentioned before, is if you want to replicate your rules and other information from library to library, the only way that I'm aware of to do it is with WinkSync. Other than that, no, you don't need any of our other products. This is a logoed product from OpenText. It's on their price list. None of our other products are, so it has to be standalone by default.
Okay. I am not seeing any other questions. If anyone does have more questions, we will give it a little bit. If you want to go ahead and enter them in the control panel, please do so now.
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. The webinar was recorded and will be available on our website shortly. We look forward to discussing Guardian with you in the future. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. And thank you.